Welcome back, spirits and seekers. If you're new here, I'm your name, and you're watching Ayatan Insights, the place where we unravel chilling ghost stories and explore the mysteries that lurk in the dark. If you love a good haunting tale, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notifications so you never miss a story that might just follow you home. Let's begin. The night air was crisp, carrying the lingering chill of early March. A faint mist clung to the quiet suburban streets, illuminated only by the occasional flickering streetlight. It was close to midnight when Alex finally pulled into his driveway, his muscles aching from another grueling shift at work. He shut off the engine and let out a deep sigh, savoring the moment of stillness before stepping out into the cold. The house was dark, just as he had left it that morning. His wife was already asleep upstairs, and all Alex wanted was to unwind with a cold beer before collapsing onto the couch. He locked the front door behind him, kicked off his shoes, and made his way to the fridge. The familiar hiss of the bottle cap popping off was oddly comforting. Sinking into the couch, he let his head fall back, staring at the ceiling in exhaustion. The house was eerily silent, aside from the occasional creak of the old wooden floors. Settling, he flipped through the TV channels absent-mindedly, frustration growing as nothing caught his interest. Eventually he gave up, opting to sit in the quiet, letting the stress of the day melt away. Then it happened. A faint pop echoed through the house, followed by the sudden whoosh of complete darkness. The power had gone out. Alex sat up instantly, his heart skipping a beat. He knew that sound all too well. It was the same dull pop that always preceded a blackout in their home. The house had a frustrating habit of losing power without warning, but something about this felt different. The air felt heavier, charged with an unshakable tension. Sighing, he pushed himself off the couch and walked to the window, peering outside. Most of the houses on his block still had their lights on. That meant the outage was isolated, to his house only. A flicker of unease crawled up his spine. Steeling himself, he decided to check the breaker box outside. He opened the front door and stepped onto the porch, the cold air biting against his skin. The wind howled softly through the empty streets. Everything seemed normal, too normal. As he moved toward the side of the house, something caught his eye. His garden hose, which he always kept neatly coiled, was sprawled across the grass. A slow realization dawned on him, tightening his chest. Like a vice, someone had been here, someone had moved it. His breath hitched. His hands curled into fists, and then from inside the house he saw it. Two beams of light flickering through the darkness, moving wildly. Flashlights. There was someone inside. Alex's pulse pounded in his ears as he stood frozen in the darkness, staring at the shifting beams of light inside his house, his own house, his sanctuary. And now someone else was inside. His first instinct was to rush in, but as he turned toward the front door, his stomach clenched. It was closed. Had he locked it behind him? His fingers scrambled for the handle. He twisted it. It didn't budge. Locked. Curse slipped from his lips as he yanked at the knob again, harder this time. He was certain he hadn't locked it. Someone had locked him out. His mind raced. Whoever was inside had realized he had stepped out and seized the moment to trap him outside. He was standing vulnerable in the open, while intruders prowled inside his home, just feet away from where his wife lay sleeping upstairs. The thought sent an icy shock through his veins. His phone. He needed his phone. His hand darted into his pocket, empty. It was inside, on the couch. Alex clenched his teeth, scanning the windows for movement. The flashlight beams had disappeared. Were they hiding, moving toward the stairs? He stepped back into the shadows of his porch, breathing shallowly, trying to think. If he tried the back door, would it be locked too? Could he break a window without making enough noise to alert them? A sudden sound made his skin crawl. Click, it came from inside, a door closing. Alex's fists tightened. They were moving through the house, deliberate, unhurried. They weren't just robbers grabbing valuables and fleeing. They were hunting for something or someone, his wife. Panic surged through him, but he forced himself to stay calm. If he acted recklessly, he'd put her in even more danger. He needed to get inside, now. His eyes flicked toward the garage, the emergency key. He had hidden it beneath the loose brick near the side door for situations exactly like this. If they hadn't found it, he still had a way in. Moving swiftly yet silently, he crouched low and hurried toward the garage, every nerve on high alert. The night was deadly quiet, except for the occasional rustle of the wind. His fingers fumbled, against the bricks, searching there. He pulled the key free and jammed it into the lock, twisting. The door creaked as it opened, revealing the pitch-black interior of the garage. Alex took a deep breath, stepping inside. The moment he did, he heard another sound, a floorboard creaking, not inside the house this time. Inside the garage. He wasn't alone. The darkness inside the garage felt suffocating, like a thick, living thing wrapping itself around Alex's body. His heartbeat pounded in his ears as he stood frozen, his eyes locked onto the shifting shadows beyond his car. He could feel the weight of something unseen pressing down on him, a presence lurking just out of sight. He wasn't alone. His grip on the emergency key tightened, but the small piece of metal felt utterly useless against the unknown terror creeping through the darkness. Then, another sound, a slow, deliberate scrape. It came from the far side of the garage, just beyond the workbench, a sound so subtle, so controlled, that it sent a violent shiver down his spine. Alex swallowed hard, his breath shallow. He knew that sound. It was the unmistakable noise of something dragging along the concrete floor. But what? And worse, who? He took a cautious step forward, his legs trembling beneath him. The dim sliver of light from the street lamp outside barely cut through the blackness, casting long, twisted shadows against the walls. His eyes darted from corner to corner, searching for movement, for something out of place. Then, just as his gaze swept past his car, he saw it. A figure. For a split second, it was there, standing just beyond the hood, motionless, its shape barely distinguishable from the darkness around it. Alex's breath caught in his throat. He opened his mouth to say something, to demand to know who was there, but the words never came, because the figure was gone. No movement, no sound, just gone. His pulse pounded wildly as sweat prickled at his skin. He took a step back, his body screaming at him to run, to get out. But then, a whisper, soft, faint, almost too quiet to hear, but it came from directly behind him. "Why did you come back?" A wave of ice shot through his veins. The voice was nothing like he had ever heard before, low, breathy, unnatural, like many voices speaking as one. Alex spun around so fast he nearly lost his balance, his fists raised instinctively. Nothing, just the darkness swallowing the space behind him. His chest rose and fell in ragged breaths. He wanted to believe his mind was playing tricks on him, that his exhaustion was distorting reality. But then, the garage door rattled, not from wind, not from something falling, from the outside. Someone, or something, was out there. And it wanted in. Panic surged through Alex's body. He took another step back, his eyes darting to the side door, the only way out, but just as he turned toward it, slam! The garage lights flickered on with a blinding snap. Alex barely had a second to react before his gaze fell on the windshield of his car, and his blood turned to ice. On the fogged-up glass, traced by something unseen, was a single word: run. Then, a breath cold, right against his ear. And this time, when the whisper came, it was laughing. Alex bolted from the garage, his breath coming in sharp, shallow gasps. The cold night air hit him like a slap, but he didn't stop. He sprinted toward the front door, fumbling with the emergency key in his sweaty hands. His fingers trembled as he shoved the key into the lock. Click. He yanked the door open and threw himself inside, slamming it shut behind him. Silence. His chest heaved. His ears strained against the stillness, waiting, praying for nothing to follow him. But then, as his breathing slowed, he realized something was wrong. The house felt different. It wasn't just quiet, it was empty. The air inside was thick, stale, as if no one had lived here in years. The walls seemed to press inward, suffocating him, and then the first sound, a faint knock, not on the front door, not on a window, from inside the house. Alex's stomach twisted into knots. The sound had come from upstairs, just a single deliberate knock, then another and another. Slow, rhythmic, as if someone knew he was listening. His feet felt like they were glued to the floor, but something in him, a twisted, reckless curiosity, forced him to move. Step by step he made his way toward the staircase. Each creak of the wooden floor echoed through the house like a scream in the silence. As he reached the bottom step, his phone vibrated in his pocket. The sudden sensation made him flinch. With trembling hands he pulled it out. Unknown caller. A deep sense of dread sank into his bones. Every instinct told him not to answer, but something made him. As if the very air around him willed his hand to move, he pressed his thumb against the screen. "Hello?" His voice was barely a whisper. At first there was nothing, just dead air. Then a sound, not a voice, not static. Breathing, shallow, raspy, not human. Alex's grip tightened around the phone. "Who is this?" he demanded, trying to sound stronger than he felt. And then, a voice. His voice. But it wasn't him. Alex. His name came through the speaker, but it was wrong. Drawn out, distorted, layered with something else. He felt his heart lurch into his throat. "Alex," the voice repeated, softer this time. Then, another knock. This time, from right behind him. Alex spun around, his body screaming with terror. But there was nothing. Only the empty living room. The dim glow of a street lamp casting shadows through the window. Then his phone screen glitched, flashing with static before going black. A single text appeared. "I see you." A chill wrapped around Alex's spine, his entire body locking up. Then, the whisper, right in his ear. "Say my name." Alex's breath hitched. He could feel something standing behind him, the air thick with its presence. But he couldn't move. He didn't even know the name. He didn't want to. But deep down, something told him. It did. And it was waiting for him to remember. Alex stood frozen, his breath barely escaping his lips. The whisper had come from right beside him, but when he turned his head, there was nothing. His phone screen remained dark, yet he could still feel the weight of the message. "I see you." Something was here, watching, waiting, and it wanted him to say its name, but Alex didn't know what it was. He didn't want to. His legs finally obeyed him, and he bolted for the door. He needed to get out of the house, out of this suffocating darkness. His hands fumbled with the lock, and just as he twisted the knob, "Bizazet!" His phone screen flickered to life. A new message. He hesitated. Every part of him screamed, "Don't look." But he did. Run. Alex didn't think. He just obeyed. He yanked. The door opened and sprinted into the night, his heartbeat hammering in his ears. The street was eerily empty, the only sound his own frantic footsteps. He needed to go somewhere, anywhere. His mind raced. The warehouse, it wasn't far, it was abandoned, but it had lights, and more importantly, it had no mirrors, no reflections, nowhere for whatever was haunting him to show itself. He tore through the empty streets, lungs burning. The cold wind sliced against his skin, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. The warehouse loomed ahead, its rusted metal doors slightly ajar. Alex stumbled inside, slamming them shut behind him. Silence. The place smelled of dust and oil. A few flickering lights buzzed above, casting long shadows over crates and rusted machinery. Alex leaned against the door, trying to catch his breath. His fingers trembled as he pulled out his phone. No new messages, no calls. Maybe whatever it was had stayed behind. Maybe he was safe. Then, a soft click. Somewhere in the darkness, a light bulb flickered on, not overhead, across the warehouse. Someone, or something, had turned it on. Alex's breath caught in his throat. His eyes darted around the space. Shadows twisted along the walls, stretching unnaturally. And then, footsteps, not hurried, not frantic, slow, deliberate, coming from behind the crates. Alex backed up, his mind screaming for a way out. But his foot struck something, a metal pipe. He grabbed it, his grip tightening. The footsteps stopped, silence, then, "Beziehst." His phone vibrated violently in his pocket. He flinched but didn't take his eyes off the shadows ahead. He reached for his phone and flipped it over. A new message. "Look up." A cold, crawling fear gripped his spine. No, he didn't want to. He shouldn't. But something made him. Slowly, he tilted his head back. A face, upside down, hanging from the rafters above him, eyes locked onto his. Mouth stretched into an unnatural grin, and then it spoke. "Say my name." The voice was a breathless hiss, inhumanly layered, as if multiple voices spoke at once. Alex staggered back, his throat locking up in terror. The thing dropped. It didn't fall like a person. It moved too fast, like a blur of shadow and bone, landing without a sound. It stood just feet away from him now, tall, thin, its limbs too long, its grin never fading. Alex gripped the pipe tighter. His mind raced. He had to run. He had to. The lights flickered, then they went out. The darkness swallowed everything, and the last thing Alex heard before the world vanished into black was his own name, whispered right next to his ear. Darkness. Thick, suffocating, absolute. Alex couldn't see, couldn't breathe. But he felt it, the presence. It was close, too close. His heartbeat pounded in his ears, loud enough to drown out everything else. Except a whisper, soft, right next to him. Still running, Alex. A shudder tore through him. He gripped the metal pipe tighter, the cold steel grounding him, reminding him he was still here, still alive. The lights above flickered weakly. A dim, dying glow, and then movement, not from one direction, from all around him. The aisles of the warehouse, once empty, were no longer silent. Something shifted in the shadows. Multiple somethings. Alex turned, eyes darting between the towering shelves lined with dust-covered crates and forgotten supplies. The dim glow of the flickering lights revealed glimpses, figures slipping between the aisles, too fast, too silent. He swallowed hard, his throat dry as sandpaper. Then a whisper, not just one, dozens. Soft voices hissing his name from behind him, to his left, to his right, above him. His breath caught. He clenched his jaw, forcing himself not to look up. Not again. The last time he did, he saw it, and it spoke to him. Say my name. He wasn't going to. Alex forced himself to move. One step, then another. He needed to get out. But the warehouse had turned into a maze, rows and rows of shelves stretching impossibly far, twisting in ways that didn't make sense. This place wasn't normal anymore. He turned a corner and stopped. A figure stood at the end of the aisle. Tall. Unnaturally tall. Arms too long. Head tilted at an unnatural angle. And that smile. That horrible, stretched smile. Alex gripped the pipe like a lifeline. The figure didn't move. It just stood. There, then another whisper right behind him. Turn around, Alex. His breath hitched. No, he wouldn't. His hands trembled as he lifted the pipe, every muscle in his body coiled with tension. Silence. The figure at the end of the aisle still hadn't moved, but Alex felt something behind him, something breathing, against his neck. Then a single cold fingertip ran down his spine. Alex snapped. He spun, swinging the pipe with all his strength, but there was nothing there, just empty space. His pulse roared in his ears. His chest heaved. And then a sound, not a whisper this time. Laughter, low, twisting, wrong. It echoed through the aisles, distorting, warping, and the figure at the end of the aisle? It was gone. Alex took a step back, his mind screaming at him to move, to run. Bezit! His phone vibrated violently in his pocket. He swallowed hard and hesitated before pulling it out. His fingers shook as he looked at the screen. A new message. You can't leave, Alex. His stomach dropped, his breathing hitched. And then another message. You're already home. The lights shut off, and this time they didn't turn back on. The darkness swallowed him whole. No flickering lights, no whispers, just the oppressive weight of the blackness closing in on all sides. Alex's breath was shallow, ragged. His heart thundered in his chest, each beat more desperate than the last. He could feel the cold sweat trickling down his spine, the phone in his trembling hand like a dead weight. "You're already home." The words from the screen burned into his mind, twisting around him like a vice. His stomach churned as panic rose in his throat. What did that mean? He wasn't home. He was in a warehouse, an endless, nightmarish maze of aisles and shadows, but the deeper truth hit him like a punch to the gut. He couldn't escape. Something had changed. The air, once stale and empty, now felt alive, as though the very walls were closing in, breathing with him. A faint noise. At first he thought it was his imagination, his own panic playing tricks on him, but then, there it was again. A scuff of a shoe, a slight creak of the floor beneath the weight of something moving. Something was there. Alex's pulse quickened. He didn't need to see it. He didn't want to see it. But he had no choice. His legs moved before he could even think, his body reacting out of pure survival instinct. He started running, each footstep muffled by the thick darkness, but the feeling of eyes on him, watching him, never ceased. The laughter, now louder, twisted through the air like an oppressive force, warping his thoughts, his perception of reality. He slammed into the corner of an aisle, the rough wood scraping against his shoulder, but he didn't slow down. The warehouse had become a living thing, each twist of the aisles, each bend in the path leading him deeper into its unnatural grasp. And then, the sound again. Louder this time, closer. A breath not his own, hot and heavy against his skin. It's coming. Alex forced his legs to pump faster, but his feet felt like lead, his movements sluggish, as though the very space around him was growing thicker, more. So oppressive. The aisles stretched on forever, as if mocking his desperation. There was no exit, no way out. The whisper came next. "Run, Alex." But it wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a command. A cold, echoing order coming from all around him. He tried to turn, tried to look behind him, but fear held him in place, his eyes glued to the narrow path ahead. The sound of footsteps was unmistakable now, slow, deliberate. It was closing in. Alex's mind screamed at him to move faster, but his body wasn't responding. His legs burned. The weight of the pipe in his hand felt like it doubled in size. Every muscle in his body was screaming in agony, but he couldn't stop. He couldn't. And then he saw it, a figure in the distance just beyond the shadowed aisles. Tall, unnaturally tall. Its limbs were elongated, its movements jerky, like it was bending reality itself as it moved toward him. That smile. The same twisted, impossible grin stretched across its face. Alex's breath caught in his throat. The thing was real. It was real, and it was coming for him. A surge of adrenaline fueled him. He couldn't outrun it, but maybe, just maybe, he could outsmart it. He veered left, diving down a narrow alley of shelves, desperate to break free from the creature's unrelenting pursuit. But the sound of the footsteps didn't stop. They followed him, echoing through the aisles, faster now. The creature was gaining on him. Alex's hand flew to his pocket. His phone. Maybe there was something he missed, another message, another clue. But the screen was black. No new messages, no signal. A cold, unsettling realization gripped him. His phone, his only connection to the outside world, was useless now. He was truly alone in this nightmare. His breath quickened, his chest tightening. The silence that followed was deafening. He was lost in the warehouse now, the aisles stretching. In impossible directions, the walls shifting in the corner of his vision. It was a labyrinth of endless shadows. And that thing, whatever it was right behind him. He had to keep moving. Alex twisted down another aisle, his hands slick with sweat, his feet slipping against the floor. The air had become thick, suffocating. Each breath was harder to take, each step heavier. Then another whisper. "Turn around, Alex." His blood ran cold. The voice was so close, as if it was breathing into his ear. Alex didn't hesitate. He didn't think. He turned, swinging the pipe blindly, desperately, and there it was. The thing stood at the end of the aisle, grinning that grotesque smile, its eyes glowing white in the dark. It didn't move. It just stood there, waiting, watching. But Alex wasn't going to stop. He couldn't. His legs were on fire, but he pushed through the pain, charging forward, his eyes locked on the creature. And just as he was about to swing the pipe, the world around him shifted. The ground beneath him rippled. The walls began to twist, the aisles warping and bending like some dark, twisted dream. The creature, it wasn't there anymore. A flicker of light caught his eye. Not from the overhead lights, but from ahead. A door, the only one in sight. His heart slammed into his chest as he sprinted toward it, the sound of his footsteps deafening in the silence. He reached for the handle, yanking it open with a force that made his knuckles crack, but the moment the door opened, he froze. Beyond it, more darkness, an endless void that stretched farther than his mind could comprehend. It was like stepping into another world, but there was no turning back now. He stepped forward, the door slamming shut behind him with a final, echoing thud, and in the stillness that followed, Alex heard the whisper one last time, "You can never leave," and the chase began anew. The door slammed shut behind him, the echo reverberating through the empty, endless expanse that lay before him. Alex barely had time to process the shifting darkness around him. There was no air, no sound, just a void that swallowed everything he was, his thoughts, his breath, even the weight of his own body. For a long moment he stood frozen, his eyes straining against the blackness, trying to find any point of reference. Anything. But there was nothing. Only the oppressive, crushing quiet that wrapped itself around him like a second skin. His mind raced. What the hell was going on? The warehouse had never been like this. The aisles, the shadows, the whispers. It was all wrong. But this place felt different. It was too still, as if time had stopped altogether. You can never leave. The voice lingered in his head, a constant hum at the back of his skull, gnawing at his sanity. What did it mean? How had he ended up here? Where was here? The only thing Alex knew for sure was that he was no longer in the warehouse. Whatever this place was, it wasn't a part of that twisted maze. He took a tentative step forward, his feet sinking into something soft, like sand or dust. His hand reached out instinctively, feeling for something, anything. His fingertips brushed against the cold surface of what felt like metal, but it was smooth, clean, too clean. Alex swallowed hard, forcing himself to breathe. He couldn't afford to panic. He had to stay calm. But the weight of uncertainty pressed down on him like 1,000 invisible hands, each one pushing him deeper into this abyss. His phone, his lifeline, still in his hand, offered no answers. The screen remained dark, lifeless. No signal, no messages, just a dead weight in his palm. He started walking, his footsteps muffled, though the sound felt distant, like his own feet were too far removed from the ground. The emptiness stretched on, and still, there was nothing. Nothing to explain. He had a strange sense of being both too aware and completely unaware. It was as if the rules of reality had stopped applying altogether. His mind raced to piece things together, the messages, the whispers, the figure. It was all connected, but how? What had brought him here? Was this some kind of nightmare? Or worse, was this real? "You're already home." The words from his phone returned to him, repeating, echoing in the silence. He had tried to make sense of them before, but the more he thought about it, the more they confused him. Home? What did that even mean? He wasn't home. He wasn't anywhere he recognized. It was like the universe itself had distorted into something unrecognizable. As he walked, the walls around him seemed to pulse with an eerie rhythm, like a heartbeat, not his, something else's. It sent a shiver crawling up his spine. The deeper he moved, the more the feeling of being watched grew, the sensation that something was just out of sight, just behind him. Hesitated, then forced himself to walk toward it. The light grew brighter as he neared, cutting through the shadows like a knife. When he reached it, he found it was a doorway, framed in a jagged halo of flickering light. It beckoned him as though waiting, but something was off. The air around. The door felt heavier, colder. The darkness on the other side seemed to crawl like a living thing. Every fiber in his being screamed to turn away, to run. But he didn't, he couldn't. He stepped through. The moment he did, a sharp cracking sound echoed in his ears, and the world around him twisted. The light flickered once, twice, then flickered. Out. Just as quickly, it was replaced with the flicker of the overhead lights from the warehouse, the shelves, the crates. He was back in the warehouse. But it wasn't the same. The aisles were even more disjointed, the shadows deeper. The oppressive silence felt even heavier. And then, something caught his eye. At the end of one of the aisles, standing still as stone, was the figure. The tall, impossibly thin thing, its limbs stretched and bent in unnatural ways, its face, still, locked in that twisted grin. But now its eyes were different. They were hollow, black empty voids sucking in the dim light. The smile was gone. Alex felt his breath catch in his throat. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, unmoving, staring at him with those hollow eyes. Alex wanted to run, to scream, to turn and leave this place, but he was rooted to the spot. His legs refused to move, as if the air itself had solidified into stone, holding him in place. Then, slowly, the figure tilted its head, as though considering him. It reached out a long, gangly arm, its fingers curling into a fist. The air around Alex shifted. Voice, the same voice that had been following him through the warehouse, whispered from the darkness. "Do you understand now, Alex?" His heart skipped. It was the same voice, but it wasn't speaking to him, it was speaking through him. It was in his mind, scraping at the edges of his thoughts. "Why are you doing this?" Alex's voice cracked, his words barely audible in the oppressive silence. The figure did not answer. It didn't need to. The answer was already there, lurking in the depths of Alex's mind. The truth he didn't want to face. "You're not supposed to leave." Suddenly, the lights flickered again, a sudden burst of brightness blinding him for a moment. When his vision cleared, the figure was gone, and the whispers returned. But this time they weren't just whispers. They were questions, endless, looping questions. What is home, Alex? Who are you running from? Where do you think you can go? Alex's chest tightened. His mind spun. The questions made no sense. They twisted his perception, suffocating him, dragging him deeper into the confusion. The more he tried to focus, the less he understood. The unanswered questions, the ones he couldn't escape. They swirled around him, trapped him, and there was no way out. That's it for today's chilling tale, but remember, the darkness never sleeps. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with anyone brave enough to listen. And as always, keep your lights on. You never know what might be lurking in the shadows. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.